Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about why I think you should read V.E Schwab. But before we go ahead and get on into the recommendations, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as well as the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new bookish content. I post new videos every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, and sometimes other days throughout the week. Also, don't forget to check down in the description box below for links to all of my social medias, my Buddy Read Discord, and my Patreon, where you can be entered into winning book giveaways from me. So I have been reading V.E Schwab for a couple of years now, and I actually own about 13 of her books, and I think I've read about 10 or 11 of those 13, so I feel like I've read enough of her books to really be able to recommend her to you as an author, and I'll talk about why I like her as an author and which books of hers are my favorite and I would recommend. So the first book of V.E Schwab's that I've ever read was A Darker Shade of Magic. This is book 1 in her Shades of Magic series, which is an adult fantasy series. And a fun fact, this was also the first audiobook that I ever listened to. So V.E Schwab, I guess, also got me into audiobook listening, but I physically read and audiobooked this book, and I just really liked the idea of like a portal fantasy of different worlds and of our main character having this like coat that he could like transform and like travel between these worlds. And she also included a bit of blood magic in here, and blood magic can be a little bit gross and a little bit gruesome, and she wasn't afraid to include those elements. So the first thing I'm going to recommend about V.E Schwab is the fact that she writes for different age groups. So she has a couple of different adult books. She also has some young adult books, and then she also has some middle grade books. So the adult books I've read of hers are the first 2 books in the Shades of Magic series, and I've also read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And this goes into the second reason that I recommend V.E Schwab is that she does write fantasy, but her fantasy can be either like heavy fantasy or more of a lighter fantasy. So the Shades of Magic series, like I said, is a portal fantasy. It is based off of real life London, but there are 4 different Londons, and all of these Londons are different, and our main character has to travel between the Londons, and there is a lot of magic and things in this series, so it is definitely heavier, harder magic. And then we have a book like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue that is considered historical fantasy. It takes place in our world starting in the 1700s all the way up to the 2000s, and the story revolves around a curse from a demon. So it has very lighter magical elements, and there's more history. So she's such a versatile writer. Another thing is that The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is a standalone. So she is able to write a lot of standalones that are fantasy, which is really rare in my opinion. And another couple standalones that she's written that are fantasy are The Near Witch, which I have not read yet, but I've heard that it is very fairy tale-esque and atmospheric, so I'm excited to get to it. And Gallant, which I just read in April and have a full review for, so I'll link that up in the cards for you guys. And this leads me to the next reason why I recommend V.E Schwab is because she writes not only adult fantasy, but she also writes young adult fantasy. So if you're someone that dabbles in both age groups like I do, then you can have one of your favorite authors that writes for both different types of age groups and read all the books. And the only series of hers that I haven't read that's young adult is The Archives, but I've heard a lot of good things about it and I would like to get to it eventually. So Gallant is a standalone. So she writes young adult standalone fantasies, and she also writes series, which is The Archived and The Monsters of Verity. And this is just another example of how versatile a writer she is. This is actually an urban fantasy. So she writes historical fantasy, heavy magic fantasy, light magic fantasy, standalone series. This is a duology that has to do with magic in music and monsters, which is such a weird juxtaposition. And it's YA, 2 books that you can easily get through, and boom, you finished a series. And then we have her middle grade series I read, which is the Cassidy Blake series. This follows a character who is a ghost hunter. And what I love about these books is that each one of these books takes place in a different part of the world. So we have Paris, we have Scotland, we have New Orleans, and V.E Schwab just encapsulates so much history and information about the different areas in her books. So I learned something while I'm reading a middle grade book, which is really cool. Like, I had no idea about the history of the Paris catacombs until I read City of Ghosts, and like I looked it up and researched it and everything and found it fascinating. I really didn't know. So she is able to incorporate a lot of history into her writing, into her books, into her fantasy. Same thing with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, a lot of history there. So she writes for different age groups and different types of fantasy within the genre that she writes. And then another reason that I recommend V.E Schwab is because her writing is so darn atmospheric. So, for example, the Cassidy Blake series is a ghost hunter series, and just the way she is able to create creepy situations, use the setting to really, really bring to life what's going on in the plot and just to give you the willies. She does such an awesome job with that, both in this series and Gallant. I could definitely recommend these books when you're like around Halloween or the fall time and just want that creepy vibe. She just knows how to write such good imagery and atmosphere. And then she dabbles a little bit into like soft science fiction with the Villain series, which is Vicious and Vengeful. This follows kind of like bad superheroes or people that acquire superhuman abilities. And the reason that I love this series so much is that she is able to create a villain and an unlikable protagonist that I fell in love with. She basically makes me sympathize with our protagonist, who's not the best person in the world, definitely morally gray. So that's another reason that I have to recommend V.E Schwab is her character development, and I think that is best exemplified in the Villain series. So we just have characters that you hate and love, but can't help to root for, even though you might not agree with some of their choices. So those are just some of the reasons that I have to recommend V.E Schwab as an author, no matter what age you are, what type of fantasy you like, whether you like standalones or series. She will definitely have a book that fits your preferences. We have historical fantasy, we have light magic fantasy, hard magic fantasy, we have urban fantasy, we have a little bit of sci-fi, we have characters that you will just grow to know and love or dislike but still love, kind of like Victor from the Vicious series. And if I had to recommend a book to start with, well, it really depends on what type of books you like to read. Me personally, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is one of my favorite books of all time, and it's a standalone, which is a good place to start, and it has very soft magic, it has romance, it has a lot of emotional scenes, and this is one of the only books to ever make me cry. So right there, you know that V.E Schwab really knows how to create situations and characters and emotions that affect the reader, because it's very rare for me to cry in a book, so she definitely did something right. And if you're looking for like a dark nitty-gritty type story, which is what I really enjoy, then I would definitely recommend her Villain series. All right, you guys, that is it for some of the reasons why I really enjoy V.E Schwab as an author and why I will continue to read her work. Let me know in the comments some of your favorite V.E Schwab books, or if you've never read her but would like to try and want to know where to start. And I will see y'all in another video soon. Goodbye.